Hello, everybody. I'm going to make this as quick and thorough yet interesting as possible. So, this was an event I had encountered just over 3 weeks ago, and this is, I guess, a test of the wills, or whatever you want to call it. How far are you willing to go to compromise and or overcome something? So I was born with a combination of blindness and deafness, and these things have actually done some pretty interesting plaguing and playing around. Just a couple of weeks ago, prior to attending a concert in Michigan just to go see Ken, favorite musician, I had woken up one morning and I lost all of my hearing. All of it. Nothing left. Nothing but the tinnitus. All you heard throughout every moment of the day was constant ringing, low and high pitches, and all of what you did. And so, naturally, I went to my doctor, and you know what they said? Sorry, Cassandra, there's nothing we can do except put a filter in your hearing aid so that it can cut off the tinnitus. I left out of there quite pissed. Am I allowed to use that word?
Yeah.
Audio guys,
I don't want to offend anybody and get banned from here. I was pretty pissed because I went over there with high anticipation that they were going to do something, and I'm like, okay, I'm trying to go listen to some R&B. So nothing they can do. So I left out of there, and everybody who kept calling my phone, I couldn't hear them. So I put forward and called to my Sorensen VP, which is a phone designed for the deaf and hard of hearing. And I'm a sign language user too, just as clear as my speeches that you're hearing right now. So, as the days went on, everything I had to do was extremely slow. I had to use Sorensen and sign language to communicate with my clients that I teach with Vibrant. And I had to text people or email. I had to either use Zoom because I have residual vision, or use VoiceOver and my Braille display, which I always do use. And so it was slower, it was very isolating, and I felt really sad. The sadness began to loom over me like an eclipse was taking over. And I said, I'm not letting this win. And I'm definitely not going to cancel that concert ticket because no. First of all, there's something called listening to the vibrations in the floor. And secondly, our brain is incredible. Our brains are absolutely incredible. We have this thing called sound memory. You know what the song sounded like before this happened to you. So anytime you feel the vibration patterns of the song, sing to it. The day of the concert was when the tinnitus and my hearing began to come back, enough to where I can understand speech again. I was not completely sucked away in silence and that constant ringing tinnitus, a nuisance. I was able to hear the marvelous music that I had waited months for. Speech and everything wasn't exactly as clear as I remember it with the hearing aid, but it was better than what it was days ago, which was absolutely nothing, and signing in frustration. I know sign language is a beautiful language, but when you have a vision loss as well, it can really throw you off. So I've been preparing for this for years, but I wasn't ready to wake up like that. So the lesson I took from this is all of the skills and the training centers that I've attended to be good at being blind and good at being deaf and hard of hearing, it all paid off. It wasn't a waste of time. Not at all. When I couldn't hear, I used sign language. And with the visual compromising, I used Braille or large print or VoiceOver. So nothing that I went through was a waste of time after all. So before you start to feel bad about something, just ask yourself, just remind yourself that everything you're going through is not a waste of time. It's gonna come back and pay off eventually. So, yeah. I hope this was interesting enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's see who's next.
Thank you.
Still recording, okay.
Awesome.
Random number between 1 and 15.
I'm back again.
Serious made a judgment as to who she wants to win. Random number between 1 and 15.
A random number between 1 and 15 is 4.
Oh, they want to hear it again.
Okay, maybe what we'll do now that we're starting to get, less random numbers and the like, shall we just start with 1 and work our way up?
Yeah.
Okay, who was 1? Okay. Up this way, Sharon. I'm making the way, Sharon.
I'm getting around the
Oh,
table.
Butterfinger.
Yeah, take your time, they have a lot of room
Sure,
to
feel
table.
free. Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
here I am, I'm around behind it. Either way, I will do. Okay. Keep coming, sorry, keep coming.
So I'll be around if anybody had questions.
Careful, there are a lot of tables.
Right here.
And right here. Go that.
Got it.
Okay,
Okay.
Sharon.
All right. So when I first moved to Massachusetts, in my 20s, somewhere in there, I lived in a little town called Townsend. And when I say little, I mean little. And how I got there is a whole other story. But this particular night, I was a student at Fitchburg State. Now Townsend, probably as the crow flies, is, I don't know, 20 minutes, something like that, from Fitchburg State. But when you can't see and you can't drive, it might as well have been the moon away. So I had it worked out that a friend of the people that I was staying with was my driver. He was gonna pick me up at Fitchburg State and bring me back. Well, that night he did not appear. And, we didn't have cell phones. I still don't remember now how I managed to get somewhere to call him. But I did call him and it was like, oh, I forgot. So, of course, he felt like he had to come get me. But I could tell he really didn't want to come get me. He was probably in his pajamas and sitting comfortably and he's probably going, oh, So I sat down on a bench and I felt guilty and I felt afraid and I felt sad and frustrated and all things balled up into one. And I think I shed a few tears. And I was sitting there and all of a sudden a dog came up to me and licked me once on the face. And I went to reach out to the dog and pet him and he was gone. And I thought, did that really happen? And I guess I'll never exactly know, but I think it did. And I think that dog sensed my distress. And it has always stayed with me because what I realized is that no matter what dire situation I'm in traveling especially, there are those things that are called travel mercies. And they are people or dogs or a sound or whatever it might be that will come to my aid and that I feel that God provides for me. So ever since that night, I have not been afraid to travel. I've had my close calls and difficulties, but I felt so provided for in that moment. And it was so stunning that it has stayed with me, and it's 30 years later. It's 40 years later, sorry. Thank you.
I'm a city girl. And back many years ago, was the summer after my first husband had passed. So I was not working at the time because I had been a stay-at-home mom and was caring for him before he passed and hadn't found a full-time job yet. And my brother calls me up, and he'd been about 5 or 6 years working for a group of camps, summer camps, some of them were day camps, some of them were overnight camps. And in a panic, he said to me, "Can you help me out? Our cook just quit." Okay. So off I go. It took me a day or two to put everything, in order, because I was going to be there for 30 days. It was pretty much going to be the month of August up in Ashby, Massachusetts. I didn't even know where Ashby, Massachusetts was. But I found it and I arrived. And they gave me a tour of this very large property. And they showed me the great hall and the kitchen and back. And there was a little cottage behind that. It was one of the next buildings where I got to stay for the next 30 days. And it happened to be the last day of a session was like day 10, and they shipped everybody home. And the buses picked up the next group of campers to come up to camp, and supper time was day 1. So it all kind of rotated right into one from the other. The first couple of nights were a little scary. I did have staff. I walked into the kitchen. I recognized probably 2 pieces of equipment. Now, I had food service history, and I was amazed because I had probably a 15-year resume in food service, but it had been mostly waitressing and some food prep, but not on this scale. I was now responsible for feeding about 100 people. There were about 60 campers plus staff. 3 meals a day and an evening snack. Okay, I arrived in the craziness and the height of dinner that was being managed. And we got through the first night. I got settled in and walked into the kitchen next morning. The camp lady, the director of the camp comes and tells me the last order for the season has already been made. You're gonna have to make it do, because they have no budget left for ordering. Okay. I have many, many recipes for do. If you ever need one, let me know. So we settle in and things are rolling along, and we get a couple of weeks in, and I decided I had enough eggs. I was gonna make scrambled eggs for breakfast. Now, we have a 6-burner stove, and one of those pans that sits 2 burners back, about 4 to 6 inches high, very nicely. And these are eggs. These aren't egg beaters. You don't pull them out of the carton. You actually get up earlier in the morning and allow yourself time to crack all of the eggs. To then add the milk, to then stir them in this giant bowl with this giant whisk and put them on the stove. And we start cooking eggs. And about 3/4 of the way to the correct doneness for scrambled eggs, the stove goes off. So I frantically call the maintenance man. Something's wrong. My stove's not working. Come fix my stove. So bleary-eyed, this fellow walks into my kitchen, pushes a few buttons, takes a look around. Hang on a minute, I'll be right back. But of course the clock is ticking and there's no heat. And I'm well on my way to not being able to serve all of my campers scrambled eggs for breakfast. And he walks back into my kitchen and says to me, "Oh, you ran out of gas." Now remember, I'm a city girl. So I look at this kid, I stick my hands on my hips, and I say, "How you run out of gas?" To which he then explains to me, "You see that big tank out beside this kitchen that you've walked by every day you've been here?" "Yeah." "So that holds propane, and it's empty." "Oh." He says, "You know what else that means?" He says, "The big tank that's at the top of the hill where everybody's up trying to take a shower and get ready for the day, emptied first. So in about 20 minutes, you have 100 people walking through your door for breakfast after having come out of an ice cold shower." Gee, thanks. So eggs didn't happen, and we scrambled for cereal and milk and if we had them Pop-Tarts or whatever we could manage that didn't need heat. Fortunately, it was one of those days where after breakfast, the entire camp was going on some kind of hiking trip and weren't going to be back until dinner. We were making sandwiches, lunch was already out the door by 10 o'clock in the morning. It was supposed to be the cleaning day for the kitchen and to get everything ready for, you had like one day that you could like strip everything down and clean it all out. So midday, truck pulls up, propane delivery comes. Turns out that the propane company driver had gone on vacation and they forgot to reschedule our delivery. So they refilled us and we were up and running again in time for dinner. And everybody was back into hot water and everyone was back into a hot dinner. And in a day or two I was able to make it up to everybody because I made them chocolate chip pancakes. So there was a happy ending all around.